Somebody said to me, "Well, you use the F word," and I say, "Well, yeah, it was born out of frustration. I won't use it again." But sometimes when you get a little bit angry, real people swear. 99% of the population swear. Let's not pretend they don't.
Your words carry weight, don't they? And
I would hope so.
But do you think that at a time when what we say is rightly scrutinised, that's the right sort of thing to come out of the mouth of
if people like me,
chair of the Tory
if
party?
People like me start clamming up and stop saying what the majority of the people in this country are thinking, then we've had it.
Can you sum up who you are in a sentence?
Well, that's a good question. Marmite.
That's a word.
That'll do.
And do you mind that?
Not really. There's some people will never agree with what I've got to say. Even if they do agree with what I say, they will not publicly agree with what I've got to say just because of the political colours I wear. And I know that because I've been in both parties.
So there you go. So do you love everything about him or do you hate what he has to say? Of course, Marmite, famous for their advertising campaign, love it or hate it. We know what Isabel thinks. Ava, what do you reckon? He says, look, I say what people are thinking, and he's direct.
Well, sure, if people are thinking about the culture war, I think that he spent the better part of the last year just sort of ramping up hatred and inciting violence. It started...
come on.
Well,
I think you've got to justify
let me make the
that.
point
That's
to start
quite
with. Well, I will justify it.
Inciting violence.
I think let's go back to when he said that people should start visiting food banks and he was hailing them as this sort of wonderful part of the community and not talking about them from the perspective of actually, should mothers who work really hard have to feed their children from food banks? Probably not. On the violence, it would be that F off back to France comment.
Where's the violence? There's no violence in that.
The violence is, up and down the country, over the last couple of years, there have been hotels and houses that have been looking after people who have migrated here or people who are seeking asylum, and they have been firebombed. They have had crowds of people outside of them, screaming at them, shouting them, telling them to go home, and all of this sort of rhetoric.
Have you been to any of these hotels?
Yes, I have, actually.
Where?
There was one in Liverpool, and I also went down to Manston when there was a similar incident. What I'm arguing is that when you say things like F off back to France, and you just basically say, this is just part of the narrative, and this is totally normal to make people feel unwelcome here and get people angry about asylum seekers being in the country.
It is
inciting
surprising that there
violence.
is massive frustration around the sheer numbers of people that are coming over here illegally.
Sure, but
that's not Lee Anderson's fault.
Okay.
Well, it is Lee Anderson's fault because he is pulling the narrative in a direction that is... He's pulling the narrative into the sewer. It's disgusting what he's been saying.
Okay. Look, let's find out what people are saying at home. And just as a visual aid, I've been told, there we go, we've got this, just to remind you, a little bit of Marmite. It's quite a big Marmite,
That's
actually.
an expensive pot of Marmite. I hope that is straight to the food bank with that one.
We'll put it here. There we go.
Don't waste it.
There we go. Now, let's find out what Mark... here we go. What Mark is saying in West Midlands. Should have rehearsed that part. Mark, good afternoon. Mark, come on. Lee Anderson, he's described himself as Marmite. Some people love him. Some people are less partial to him. Where do you stand?
I like Marmite, but I don't like him. I can see right through him, I'm afraid.
OK, what don't you like about him? Because as you heard there...
Telling people they can live on 20 or 30p a day. I used to cook in a budget, in the care sector, and I used to have to work the budget, so there's no way you could do that.
He says he speaks for the people, Mark. He says he's the politician who's not afraid to say what everyone's thinking. What do you make of that?
Some people are thinking, anti sort of, but personally, I blame the government more than I don't really blame people. There's always been immigrants. I was, when I was born, I lived in Peterborough, and it was mostly Italian, Polish where I lived, and I've always grown up with them, so I've got no problem. I've sort of integrated, and I've got no problem with it, really.
Isabel, the comments that Ava was saying, look, let's not argue whether or not they're inciting violence or not. Is it acceptable, do you think, from a politician, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, to say... I
don't like it, OK?
You don't like it?
That's the truth. I think it's not classy to use that kind of language. I think our politicians should set a better example. That's the truth. OK. Mark, what do you make of the language? Do you think it was inappropriate? Do you think, though, that...
I think he's pandering to the kind of people that support him, basically. I think, people do like him because he shouts and rants a bit like Farage, but most people with any intelligence can see straight through him in my mind.
But do you think that the reason some people really like Lee Anderson is because he doesn't behave like other politicians? I mean, he was doing an interview with the other person you just mentioned, Nigel Farage, and he said, look, we have failed on immigration. This government's been in charge for 13 years and it has failed. You're not going to find many politicians who are basically going to say things like that out loud. They know it, but when you interview them, and trust me, because I do interview these people, they're not going to admit mistakes like that. He does. Should he get some credit for that?
I guess in that text, in that context, yes, but I still don't like the man,
Okay. You're still back to the Marmite. There we go. Mark, thank you. Let's take another call. George in Portsmouth. George, good afternoon.
Hello, Alexis.
Hello. He's described himself as Marmite. Where are you on the Marmite issue?
Well, I have to say it's the first thing I agree with Lee Anderson on for a good long while. The way I see it, he's just kind of a person who's out more for money than for trying to benefit his constituents. I mean, that's why he, on one hand, disreputes the idea of MPs having a plus 100k salary and then 18 months later taking a job at GB News. It's very clear that he has no concern for the issues of the day. He just cares about making money.
I think that's really unfair. I mean, not many people go into politics to make money. It's a really thankless job. Here we are sitting, dissecting everything the guy says, talking about whether people love or hate him. I mean, I tell you, there are a lot of ways to make a lot better money than MPs earn. And
that's why he works on a rival TV station quite a lot of the time of the week, which by the way is absolutely ridiculous, because if you are someone who truly cares about your constituents, then you're not in front of a camera, you're out there actually working hard to make life better.
Oh, I don't know about that. You've got to publicise your policies.
Well, go and publicise them in Ashfield. Go and talk to the people. He's always going on about food banks and how people are homeless. What has he done to change their lives or make their lives better?
Well, by delivering a sermon. I'm certainly not here to give the great defence of Lee Anderson, but I am just saying I don't think it's fair to say all he's in it for is to make money. There are easier ways to make money.
But why? You said you liked him. What is it? Is it the directness?
I think I explained that at the beginning. I've spent 20 years dealing with politicians. They never say it as it is. They talk in riddles. They never admit when they've screwed things up. He's quite open about that.
Is it always a good idea to be that open?
I think you've got to be open. I think if you're a politician, don't pretend that you've got a great record on immigration. It's been a disaster, and he admits that.
OK. I've got to show you one tweet from our colleague and friend Dan Walker. And I found this actually quite interesting. This is what Dan had to say about doing the interview. Bile surrounding this post is bonkers. He's the deputy chair of the ruling party. The whole point of People Behind Politics series is that we want to talk to MPs of all persuasions. The insults and threats on here are saturated in the prejudice of the authors claim to detest. Yeah. Ava, why does he rile people up so much? And it feels like, and this is, some people have observed that the more he upsets people, the more powerful or successful, perhaps, the whole campaign of speaking your mind and the sort of upsetting the right people, what you've referred to as the sort of culture wars. But why does he upset people so much?
I think it's where he's taken the conversation, right? When you can demean food bank usage to the level that he has, it does upset people. I'm never going to condone threats made against an MP. I'm never, ever going to say that's okay. But I don't understand why when Lee Anderson says something, disgusting, it's free speech and it's exciting and he's just speaking his mind. But then when a person comes back to him on a social media website and says, I'm disgusted by what you've said, suddenly they're a problem and they're not able to communicate properly.
Well, he hasn't said that, though, has he? He's not said they shouldn't respond in that way.
OK, let's take a couple more calls. Kenny in Coventry. Good afternoon, Kenny.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us, Kenny. He's described himself as Marmite. How do you see him?
I actually see him as straight talking.
Right.
He reminds me a little bit of Nigel Farage.
OK.
But he's got a little bit more spine about him. And the lady in the green, I love her to bits.
Ava.
But he's not inciting violence.
He's not inciting
violence. You don't think he's inciting violence? He says it like he sees it. OK, Kenny, thank you. I'm only moving on because I've run out of time and I want to squeeze in Bill in Bristol. Bill, What do you think? Marmite, do you love what he stands for, or do you maybe not like it that much?
Hi there. He's not coming across very well at the moment, my friend, including not just the way he's coming across politically, but even fossil fuel and things like this. There's a lot of people, I've got great friends that are in London and places like that who are against this guy. He's causing a lot of problems, my friend, even in Mansfield, where he was originally from. There's a lot of corruption at the moment in the Tory party, and we want him out, basically.
Okay, that sounded like a sort of a party political broadcast from somewhere in Bristol, Bill, but thank you. Do you think it was a good move by Rishi Sunak to put him as deputy chairman?
One of the very few good moves that Rishi Sunak has made, actually, yes. I mean, finally the Tories look a bit real, but it's not going to save them. I think Bill will get his wish quite soon.
I think it was quite similar to what happened with Nigel Farage during the 2019 election, right? He was fantastic for Boris Johnson in the campaign because he sort of pulled the language further to the right. So the Tories never had to say the sort of things that Nigel was saying. And Lee Anderson is doing that for Rishi Sunak right now. Rishi's not going to go as hard on immigration as Lee Anderson will. Lee Anderson can pull the language into the gutter and they benefit.
I see no gutters here. I just see realities.
I see a sewer.
We couldn't have divided you more on this, I think.
You like that,
if we try, well, I think it's interesting, but I also feel for my colleague and friend Dan Walker that I don't think journalists should be getting abuse for interviewing people in the public life. Yeah,
you shouldn't be at all.
But the question that matters, of course, before we go. Actual Marmite.
I want that Marmite. Who's having it?
Like it or hate it?
I love it. I want that.
Love it. Actual
Huge
Marmite.
fan. Really good in a vegan
we have to
spaghetti
fight for it.
bolognese.